In this series of videos I'm restoring this ASR33 teletype machine. In the previous video I refitted the electronics pack and we're now ready, or getting close at least, to being able to power up the machine and start trying to actually print with it. There is an important job I need to do before that, which is to replace this head bump damper. Basically it's a hammer, impact hammer that pushes the head against the paper. It's in very poor condition. Now unfortunately the metal post it sits on is exposed, so if it has been run like this and anyone's trying to print with it like this, then it may well have already damaged the print head. I've had a look at it, I can't see any damage, but usually if the metal post is exposed then it's already damaged the head, but there's nothing I can do about that at the moment. But the next thing I need to do before I can try printing is to replace this bumper. They turn to kind of this sort of mush, bit like Jelly Baby, but what I'll do now is get this off and out of the way, and then I'll turn the camera back on and we'll see what we've got to work with here. There's normally a small metal post sticking out of this, but of course these hammers are no longer available, and we need to find some alternative. There are quite a few different approaches to this. You'll find a lot of information online about various methods to deal with this, but there's a particular method that I use that seems to work fairly well, so I'll demonstrate that in this video. Step 1, get the old hammer out of the way. Okay, so I've removed the hammer arm and got rid of the remainder of the bits of congealed rubber that are left on there. And I thought I'd show you this before I go any further. You can see from this that what you're supposed to be able to do is just pop the old one off and then just push a new one on. The hammers are deemed to be consumables, they don't last all that long, so whatever solution you come up with, it is something you're going to need to repeat if you use the machine for any length of time. As I say, they are meant to be consumables, so that's why they originally just sort of popped off and were supposed to be easy to replace. The method I use for replacing these, now first you notice this is metal, and luckily I thought the metal was protruding through and had hit the print head. Luckily it looks like there was just a bit of rubber left and we hadn't quite got down to the metal. What I was looking at was a bit of shiny rubber. It looked like metal, but I don't think it was, which hopefully means that the print head has survived. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of metal under here, so the tip of the screwdriver is normally where a new hammer rubber would come to, so there's not a lot of padding on this with a new hammer. And what I do is I change it slightly. Firstly, I can't get the hammers, so we need to come up with something as an alternative. And what I use is rubber neoprene bump stops. So they are, the ones I choose are 15mm diameter, and they are pretty much exactly the same diameter as the original hammer before they start to spread out. The ones, you can get these with different threads. The ones I've found tend to work fairly well are the M4 version, and what I do is I completely remove the old hammer support. It's kind of in the way. These do contain a bit of metal, but it's not very deep. It's nowhere near as much as on the original, so there's a lot more padding on this than there is on the original hammer, but it is still fairly firm and of course much more resilient than the older material that was originally used. Modern materials of course a lot better. Even so, this will be a consumable, so it's something I want to be able to change fairly easily and without removing this arm. This arm's a bit of a pain to take out because when you put it back you have to adjust the throw, and it's a bit of a fiddly adjustment, and it's a bit of a fiddly operation getting this thing in and out to start with. So what I'll be doing now is drilling out the back to the correct diameter hole so I can tap it for M4. This will then screw in. I'll shorten this thread. This will then screw in, and I'll put a lock nut on the back. I'll use M4 nut, but I will grind it down to about half its original thickness. Now that means that the overall mass of this is going to be very slightly less than it was, but it will be very close. But we will get a much better material for the impact. It's quite firm, but it's got a very nice kind of compliant texture to it, so hopefully it will give a much better and easier life for the print head. And of course when I come to change it, it'll just be a case of unscrewing the old one and screwing the new one in. I will use some non-permanent Loctite when I fit the nut. I don't want it unscrewing and coming out and doing any damage to the print head, but I'll show you what I've done once I've got this modified. I don't like modifying old machines. I'd much rather keep it like this, but as I said, the chances of finding one of these is almost zero. But what I will do when I drill it out is I will retain this, and if ever I do find a supply for the hammers, I will be able to refit this and return it to its current state. But I need something that's going to work and be fairly easy to keep the machine in operation. So I'll go and get this modified, and then we'll have a look at it before I refit it to the machine. Okay, so I've removed the original boss. I've milled a slight recess in here to allow the pad to screw all the way in, because of course the thread doesn't go quite all the way to the end, and I've ground down a nut to quarter height. So this will now screw into the bracket, and then the nut will screw on the back as a lock nut. What I'm going to do is use a bit of purple thread lock, using purple because it's quite easy to remove, and as I said, this is really a consumable. So I'll do that and get this screwed back into the machine, and that's how it will look when it's complete. So it doesn't look too bad, and it's the right diameter and depth as the original. It's just kind of a nicer type of material. It's less likely to do any damage to the head. Also, the metal part of this is much shallower, so if this does start to disintegrate, it's going to have to go a lot further before it gets to bare metal. Okay, so I'll get this assembled, Loctited, and I'll refit this to the machine. Okay, I've got the hammer fitted back into the machine. As you can see, it doesn't look too bad, and more importantly, when I need to change this, all I have to do is remove the lock nut from the back, screw out the pad, screw in a new one, and then refit the lock nut. And as I say, this material does seem to be much more suited to this. It's nice and compliant. It's not too soft, but it's got a nice kind of spongy texture, so it shouldn't do any damage to the print head when it impacts it. And we'll see how it works. The height should be correct. I've made it the same height as a new original. The only difference here, of course, is instead of half of this height being solid as it is in the original, about 3/4 of this is soft and only 1/4 solid. So again, hopefully that will give even more protection for the head. Next thing I can do is actually start powering this up and see if we can print any characters. Okay, so with the new rubber pad fitted, I've put the original ribbon back in. It's quite dry, but it should at least show some imprints if it works at all. I've fitted a piece of plain paper. Don't want to put a reel in there, there's nowhere to support it at the moment. Without the case there, it's just easy to test it with a piece of plain paper. I've plugged in the plugs that I need for the basic machine to work. Now, with everything being tested and it's looking like everything so far is working, I did test the solenoid driver with the actual solenoid plugged in and just set the current. In fact, I didn't set it, I just checked it, and it was about 490 milliamps, so it's very close to the 500 milliamps it's supposed to be. So I left that. Re-lubricated the hammer bail, because obviously I've taken that out and had to clean that up, so that's been re-lubricated. I've rechecked everything to make sure that it's free, and so what should happen now, I've got the switch, the selector switch, the mode switch, set to local. So what should happen when we start it up? It might make a bit of noise when it first starts, because I don't know what position the drive motor was stopped in. It's not actually been cycled yet. But it should settle down, and the motor will be running continuously, but it shouldn't be doing anything. If it's chattering or banging or crashing, then something's wrong. In local mode, it should run the motor and be waiting for a key press to trigger a cycle. When I press the key, it should, if everything's working, go through quite a complex process and ultimately print the character on the paper. I doubt we'll be able to see much if it does that, because, as I say, it's a very old ribbon. But we'll give it a go and see what happens, and hopefully we see something other than smoke. So I'll get this. I haven't got it all reconnected. I've still got obviously the reader and the punch to fit, and then I've got to check the configuration. This is just to see if the keyboard, printer and the basic electronics and power supplies work. Okay, so I'll get it powered up. I'm going to run it to about probably 100 volts or so, just to try and give it a bit of a chance if something goes wrong. But hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not going to do anything drastic. So that was quite promising. Notice the initial surge, and that it does that until the main clutch breaks free. And because the clutch has got the detent, basically the disengage stop, as soon as it hit that, it spun up and disengaged the clutch, and then it started spinning freely. So that's quite a good first sign. I'm going to leave it running a bit longer this time and see what the current settles down to. Okay, so we're at 100 volts. It's 1.3 amps, which is about right for this, so that's looking quite good. Just making sure the paper's not getting sucked into the fan, and everything being in the state we hope it's in. If I press the key, we should get something happening in the machine, so fingers crossed. It is in fact an H. Okay, a couple of weird characters at the beginning. I think that's just because the mechanism was stopped in an odd position when I powered it off last time. It's never been properly cycled, so hopefully it won't do that again. It's printing the correct characters. One thing to bear in mind here, and a good comment somebody made, was that the O and the 0 seem to have been swapped over, and if you look at the text you probably can't see it. But I'll zoom you in and then I can explain this better, but I'll turn the machine off so you can hear me. Okay, so notice that what I've typed is hello world, but notice the O is what you'd more traditionally think of as being a 0. And someone did ask, had I swapped over by mistake when I rebuilt the keyboard the 0 and the O key? And the answer is no, I haven't. That's just the way these machines were. In fact, it's impossible to swap those two keys over because they're different positions, different rows on the keyboard, so it would be impossible to physically swap them. But this is one of the confusing things with older machines, that back when this machine was being built, the slash that was used to differentiate between the 0, the numerical 0, and the letter O, the slash was actually through the letter O and not the numerical 0. That was changed later, possibly because the character with the slash through it clashed with some languages which already use that character, and so I think they changed it so that the numerical 0 had the slash through, because then there wasn't a clash. Okay, so I'll power this up again. We'll give it one last go, and that should be it for this video. But obviously very promising step forward. Everything does seem to work the way it should. I need to fit a new ribbon so we can get some decent printing, but obviously the hammer bell and the hammer pad seem to work fine. It's giving about the right impact force. It's not leaving a big mark on the paper, but it is hitting hard enough to transfer the ink, which is what we need, and it's also not making any horrible noises. In fact, this machine is surprisingly quiet. I don't know quite how how well it's coming over on the video, but in idle mode, when it's not printing, it's very quiet, and when I press a key, no weird noises, just making the usual teletype noise. So looking quite promising. We'll get it powered up, and that'll be it for this video. In the next video we'll refit the punch, see if that works, and then finally we'll get on to the reader, and then we'll look at connecting it to some external devices. Okay, so I've fitted a fresh piece of paper. We'll give it one more go.